Hi, I'm Steve Taylor with Think HR and Insurance Services. We create benefit plans that people understand and will actually use. Today, we're going to review the podcast All In, where Chamath, Jason, and Sachs, they're discussing why you should abolish HR. In this conversation, it's so interesting to hear their thoughts on what HR does. And interestingly enough, I feel like even though they're saying they want to abolish HR, it actually proves the point of exactly why you do need HR. But we're going to watch this video and I'm going to give you my thoughts along the way. Let's dive right on in.
Objective for an organization to have. This is like a topic a lot of people I've heard kind of flip back and forth on.
There is no company where I have majority control where I have an HR department.
You don't have an HR department.
No.
Say more. Why?
I think that it's very important. You should go to a very respected lawyer at a third party firm, someone very visible, an Eric Holder type person. And you should work with that law firm and retain them so that you have an escape valve. If there are any kind of serious issues that need to be escalated, so that you can get them into the hands of a dispassionate third-party person who can then appropriately inform the board, the CEO, and investigate.
So you should have a reactive HR department that doesn't proactively solve problems and creates tension, toxicity, and chaos in your organization amongst the people who work there. Okay, like that makes sense. Okay. All right. So first off, he says he doesn't have an HR team, like an HR department at all. And one of the reasons he says that he doesn't have one is because it makes more sense to have a third party, dispassionate person who's possibly cold managing this stuff so that they can report these issues directly to the CEO, the board, and then they can fix them. Well, how is the problem ever going to get to the CEO and to the board? Like, what is the route? What is the chain of command there? Also, what if the complaint is about a direct report to a certain leader? So then you expect that direct report to go what, to another leader? That where it's not their job? Like, are they supposed to go to the accountant? Or are they supposed to go to the CEO? Or are they themselves supposed to go to the outside counsel that you've hired and run up your bill? Like, how does that actually make any sense at all? Unless it's been an issue like that, is being communicated like throughout the organization, you're going to create these silos of information where stuff is never going to get out. So then now you're creating a space where it's not safe to say things, to create feedback loops and create a safe environment for employees. Like, this is literally like an HR nightmare, right? And I don't think this is actually how the organizations he works with run in some way, shape, or form. I think he's just really confused and just doesn't understand what HR is at all. And it's very apparent because HR works with legal to create that process. Let's see more what he's got to say.
So that covers sort of all the bad things that can happen. Then there are buckets of, I think, good things. One important set of things is around benefits. My perspective is that the team should build their own benefits package that they want. They should understand the P&L of the company that they work for.
Ideally.
They should be given a budget. And in my companies, again, what I do.
Look, I 100% agree. Employees should be able to have the voice and say what type of benefits they want, what incentives are going to make them excited. But also, like, they don't have the education to know what benefits are out there. I mean, if you've ever been on an open enrollment call, and we give lots of them, people don't all the time know what a copay is or a deductible or a network. So you expect those people with that level of education, possibly specifically on benefits, to know how to create a perfect benefit package for the whole organization. That doesn't really make sense. Ideally, yeah, people would know the P&L. If they knew the P&L, they would make better decisions. But this is like the lens of like an investor or an owner talking to people. If those people thought like that, they would probably be the owners of their own company because they wouldn't be able to unsee the margins and there would be mass chaos in your organization. So, let's keep going here and see what else he's got to say.
Do is I allow committees to form and I ask those committees to be diverse. But what I mean by diverse is I want somebody who has a sick partner. I want somebody who has a family. I want somebody who's young and single, so that the diversity of benefits reflects what all these people need. They go and talk to folks, they come back and they choose on behalf of the whole company, and there's a voting mechanism.
Okay, so like that makes sense in a way. I get like ideally it does make sense, but in practice that doesn't work that it doesn't work well. So if you have somebody who like is in the organization and they have a sick spouse, they have cancer, let's say, and they're on the committee. Well, how do you know that that person has cancer? They would have to tell people that, hey, my partner, they have cancer, and I would, like to have my voice reflected in these plans. So, in the way the result is, he wants the employees to have benefits that they actually want. Great, but then the process of getting there is what HR helps you do, right? It doesn't make sense to put the burden of picking the plans on the people using them because it's not their job. They don't know benefits that well all the time. Now this employee is supposed to be an expert in like what would be the best care possibly for their team. Like this is the type of benefit that we would want. My spouse, she has cancer. And by the way, if your spouse has cancer, then there's a certain type of claims that they have, and your company may get high renewals. So then, if everybody's getting high renewals, then the team might say, well, you know what? We don't want our cost to be so high. So what can we do to mitigate our issue? Well, our cost of insurance only went up when so and so's wife got cancer. Oh, well, then if that's the case, then we want better benefits. Well, then let's get rid of so and so, and then we won't have to worry about this problem, and our benefits cost might go down. That's the type of stuff that can happen if you don't contain these committees or you don't have HR running the process, right? And anyhow, like HR themselves shouldn't even know who has cancer, who doesn't have cancer, unless it's just folklore or some stuff around the water cooler. Really, what HR should do is work with a third-party neutral broker or HR consultant that can help them craft these plan designs based off of how people use the plan, take that feedback and then share with the employees, hey, would you use these types of plans? What do you guys think? What are things you would want to have change, and get feedback loops, right? That would be a more appropriate way. So I think ideally what he's trying to get to is he wants an organization where there's like a great employee culture, everybody's performing well, but at the same time, the process of getting there, that is people management, that is HR. So clearly he doesn't get what HR does exactly if he thinks he can just outsource the whole thing to a committee. By the way, it takes like 50 or 60 hours of work to actually do a full audit and figure out what benefit plans the company should have. So do you want those people spending, like a committee of 5 to 10 people spending a week of time, 5% of their year on this, or doing their job that they're good at? Depends on what those employees' value is to the company.
Then when it comes to hiring, I think what has to happen is that the person that for whom that person will end up working for, it's the head of engineering, it's the head of sales. Those are the people that should be running the hiring processes. I don't like to outsource it to recruiters. I don't like to outsource it to HR. So when you strip all of these jobs away,
you don't like to outsource the hiring processes to HR or an outside recruiter. I don't think my friend understands the processes that have to happen when hiring somebody. I think, yes, they should be involved and decide what that process should look like for their business unit within the organization, but they shouldn't be the ones that are making sure that they have I-9s and W-4s and onboarding and making sure they have their computer and that they're going to the company level trainings and taking their sexual harassment, all that stuff. They shouldn't be managing that stuff. They also shouldn't be managing the process of collecting thousands of resumes online. You put something out there on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever it is, like, hey, we're hiring right now. Here's like our job applications. Should they be going through all those job applications themselves? Every single one of them? Have you hired somebody in 2024? Have you seen how many resumes will fly like right into your inbox as soon as you say, hey, like I'm hiring for this position? So look, like I think that administratively, HR would help facilitate and create that process with leaders. They would work with the organizational leaders of that business unit to create that process. I don't think HR should own the process. I think that they should facilitate the process and advise and consult that business leader on how to make something that is effective for the company's culture, creates the organization that they're ultimately going to be responsible for reporting the results of, and they should be an advocate for that leader. They're not in opposition, right? And if your company is small enough, you're under 100 people or under 50 people, you really shouldn't have more than like one or two HR people generally, depending on the organization's needs. But also, you do need somebody either internally or externally that is focused on creating these processes with your team. I think a lot of times it does make sense to outsource what you've never managed before. I don't think that that anything he said so far abolishes HR. But let's see if he's got something good coming up.
HR doesn't have a role. And what is left over is the very dark part of HR in most organizations.
So far, just to recap, he said that for HR, you should have a third-party cold employment law attorney that takes all of the HR issues that, if they bubble up to the top, they're able to report back to the CEO and the board. That's the first thing. The next thing he said HR should do is benefits, but he would rather form committees and have the people in the committees, they decide the benefits that they want, because it's just boom, bibbity bobbity boo. Benefits come to you, There's a whole process that happens to even get benefits installed and evaluate them. So those are the two items that he said so far, right? So let's keep, and the hiring process. And the hiring process should be done by the manager. So hiring, benefits, and general HR triage of like problems, those things can all be abolished. Now we're at the point where it's just the bad part of HR. So let's see, let's go back.
Strip all of these jobs away, HR doesn't have a role. And what is left over is the very dark part of HR in most organizations, which is the police person, the policeman, right? What does Sachs call it? The commissar. That is why everybody hates HR. I've never met a company where that is a successful role over long periods of time. They are this conflict creating entity inside of an organization that slows organizations down. So
BS, man. BS. I think in his organizations, the way he's describing it, the reason why you have an HR person that's a policeman is because people are getting frustrated, absolutely frustrated, that there's all these problems siloed and silenced by the leadership and the heads of those organizations, because they're not there's nothing that's incentivizing them or moving them towards the behavior of, hey, I should report this problem on up to the next person, to the CEO, to the board, because then it's going to go to the employment law attorney, and then it could be a big issue that ends up being relating back to me, and I could get fired. So then you create this toxic environment where everybody's like very upset and pissed off. And then if you have an HR person that you decide to install after that, or you have this dark place of HR, it's because you haven't empowered HR to take any of these actions to get rid of these things. I mean, this is HR's job, is to literally take the people and incentivize the behaviors and make sure that there's a safe, happy environment for those people to operate in. I mean, I don't get what the angst, or I don't get this opinion of HR. It seems very, very off base as far as like what a real HR team does. And to say everybody hates HR, I mean, I think he hates HR. I believe it sounds like he really hates HR. He's had a bad experience with them in some way, shape, or form, and I don't know what it is. But he clearly, anybody who tells me that they have a policeman in HR or they hate it, well, then that's a leadership issue. You should create an incentive where the people side of your business, they're measured on things where that wouldn't be tolerated, right? There needs to be a certain feedback loop or certain metrics or better KPIs in place you as a leader or a CEO should have in order to incentivize that HR person to not behave in that way. And if they do behave that way, it should be unacceptable, right? And if it is unacceptable to the organization, you should have a way to performance and coach those people out.
That allows me to empower individuals to actually design the benefits that they want, to hire the team that they want, and I let them understand the P&L in a very clear, transparent way, and the results are what the results are. You want more bonuses? Hire better people. And then what I do is at the end of every year, I talk about this distribution of talent, and I make sure we are identifying the bottom 5 or 10%. They need to be managed up or they must be fired. Every year. And it does not matter how big the company is. You must manage up or out the bottom 5 to 10%. And in some cases, I'm talking about one person because it's a small company. And in other cases, I'm talking about 30 or 40 people.
So just hire the best person for the job.
No, you eliminate HR.
Yeah.
You empower the team, allow them to make their own decisions. Measure it, hold them accountable.
Right. So if you have a salesperson who just hires their, I don't know, 15 sorority sisters or fraternity brothers, whatever it is.
Okay, by the way, this is terrible advice. And it's honestly, it's not practical. It doesn't make any sense at all. So you're going to basically take away the HR function, and then you're going to throw all the work that HR does, that person, onto your leadership teams and have them put that in their organization. So then how are those organizations going to have like one culture, one strategy of how they operate and do things? Who's going to oversee that? So then the COO or CFO or the CEO, somebody at some point's got to take control over how people interact and how we report. So like my question would be, well, how do we identify those KPIs? And then who manages those KPIs? And then where do you go to learn those things when you're coming into the organization? What's the onboarding and training? So does the leadership team within that business unit, is it their responsibility to almost house HR inside of their organization? Or is it easier for you to work with an HR business partner that understands the entire organization's people structure, their comp plans, and how it all flows together, so that when we report payroll, when we report all these things, it's all done in a nice, seamless way, and somebody has lordship over that. And they work with finance, and finance helps out with payroll and financing and making sure we can afford all these different hires and fires and reporting metrics and all these things. Like, sounds to me like accountability shuts down once you get big enough in an organization and you don't have those functions. Now, I think you can get away with outsourcing HR in the beginning again, but what he's talking about doesn't make any sense. The work still has to be done. You're just pushing it on other people.
And it just becomes not a diverse group.
Well, hold on.
It is what it is.
That still may be diverse. This is my point. Like the thing is that like there's different ways to sell. There's different sales motions. There's the sort of like elephant hunting kind of sales model. There's the dialing for dollars thing. So even those 15 sorority sisters, the way you describe it, could actually be diverse. My point is that kind of superficial marking based on immutable traits will not yield a great organization. Instead, it's you're empowered to hire whomever you want. Just know that at the end of the year, we're going to measure them. Your bonus, their bonus, the company's performance.
So it's just all performance. Yeah.
Performance.
I mean, Frank's.
There you go. Performance. The man just wants performance. The man wants performance. He said performance. The ease of his face when he said performance, that seems like that's all he wants is performance. I mean, at the end of the day, as a capitalist and investor, as a majority owner of a company, of course, all you want is performance. That's great. I think that the execution of that performance and the process of getting there is being glossed over at such a high level that it's just very clear that this advice on abolishing HR is just simply because this person does not understand at all whatsoever what real good HR people do, or just doesn't have a way to appreciate it. So I do think that it is up to the HR teams and those HR professionals to start educating themselves on how the P&L works. Take some of his advice here, like, hey, how does the P&L work? How does like creating a budget work for the overall organization? And start with like each leadership team in their business unit and start to get internal advocates so that you can, then actually create a cohesive model where the chief people officer or the head of HR has a seat at the table. Because the only reason they don't have a seat at the table is because, as you'll hear in a second, they don't value it. They just want results. But how you get there and how you facilitate that happening, that is HR's role.
Slootman said this, and he got barbecued at some point. He said, I don't have time to do this diversity stuff.
No,
I'd
but
have to hire the best
but
person.
by the way, in my companies, like for example, like when you do SOC 2 compliance, you have to generate these reports, okay? Especially for some of our customers, some of our companies that actually show the diversity of our team. And when we measure them on the immutable traits, that whatever they represent as their gender, whatever they represent as other dimensions, we are incredibly, incredibly diverse anyways. But the way
I've
that
never seen a startup that isn't diverse. Silicon Valley attracts such a diverse mix of people. What do we know about success factors for startups? Number one, the ones that are successful have a culture of meritocracy. Number two, they're non-bureaucratic and they don't have too much G&A, basically overhead in the company. Now, all those things are contradicted by having a large HR team, or especially
Who has a large HR team when a company is just starting off? Nobody does. Nobody does. So a lot of these opinions that you're hearing so far are of the premise like, hey, these, DEI initiatives that we have in place, they're a waste of space. They're not important, right? And then they go into, we should just abolish HR. I think that these are two incredibly separate conversations. I think that the place for DEI is more in, well, if we have a meritocracy, the meritocracy is based off of what experience do you have and what have you done to show you can get this opportunity in the future, right? Like that's pretty much, I want a promotion, all that. That's DEI is all about, well, has there been a fair amount of people, diverse people in your organization that have been given the opportunity to contribute to the organization? That's the spirit of what DEI should be. Diversity, equity, inclusion, right? It's inclusion, right? And it's because, well, maybe I didn't get that role because I couldn't afford to go to that college because of my socioeconomic background, right? Maybe now that I've been in the organization, what can I show that I do and contribute within the organization? What opportunity do I have to do that to show that I'm ready for this role, aside from just having like a college degree, all those things, right? That's really what the DEI role should ideally do. And normally people are not hiring for that role or focused on that until you're hundreds and if not thousands of people, because it doesn't make sense yet. It just doesn't quite make sense. You're not even a going concern. You can't even afford that piece of it. So I think it's almost like ridiculous to say that you're going to abolish HR and that HR has no function or rule except for to go around causing problems, right?
a DEI organization, right? They add bureaucracy, they add overhead.
PIPs.
And what's that?
PIPs, performance improvement.
They cut it.
I mean, bro, you're saying you want a meritocracy, but PIPs are a problem? A performance improvement plan is, hey, how are you performing? Okay, this is what we need you to get to in order to be considered a performer here. It's communication. Do you want them to just be, able to come in the organization and just figure it out and perform? Well, then they would just own the company like you do, right? Possibly. That's what it sounds like.
Well, PIPs are great. I PIP people all the time.
Does it work?
Great.
I mean, I know some people are just like, these PIPs don't work.
If you're an unperforming member of the team and you've been identified in the bottom 5 or 10%, we have a responsibility as management to coach you up or to get you to an organization where you're not in the bottom 5 or 10%. That's the right thing to do for people.
PIPs don't work when managers don't work. And guess who always, complains about, management not getting PIPs or properly reporting things so that they can help them get those people off the team? HR usually does, right? Because HR is the one who actually has to process all that paperwork and make sure that they are properly documenting so that they don't get into legal problems as a company. Because you don't want to just go from having something simple as identifying somebody who's not performing to a lawsuit because, I got rid of them because of performance. Well, performance based off of what? They can say they don't feel like they were communicated their performance metrics and exactly what they needed to do. And a lot of times that does happen, especially in startup environments, which leaves them open to possible issues. Hey, well, they fired me and there was actually no performance metric, yet they're paying me a base and bonus. and my bonus is based off of what? So then they basically lied to me. My OTE is not really what it is, all that, just to get me over here. And then it's fraudulent, right? You can't do that to employees. So anyhow, let's keep going.
You do that by being very transparent and writing it down. You are not good at these things. You're underperforming in these things. Fix them or you will not be here. That's a very fair thing to tell somebody.
Yeah, look, how you want to implement your own meritocracy, I think there's different ways for founders to do that. The point is you want these companies to be a meritocracy. You don't want advancement in the company to be based on factors other than skill, merit, hard work, things like that.
Performance.
We know performance. We know that's a bad path to go on. I think a lot of founders don't understand that DEI is not something they have to do. They don't have to have a DEI organization. This has somehow become a thing. It's not required. And I think people are realizing, like, why would you do that? Why would you create this large bureaucracy in the company that...
DEI is not a large bureaucracy in the company. It's a concept of something where it's like DEI is, we need to look at our internal workforce and figure out like, hey, are we providing fair opportunity for everyone to get this role or not? What are some measurements we can look at for that, right? I do agree that the meritocracy piece is important, but the other piece again goes back to, it has to do with, are these people getting the opportunities as everyone else based off of the criteria that we have? Is there socioeconomic blockages that don't allow certain people of color to be in these roles? Is there ways that we can utilize some of these folks for their the meritocracy of like, what are their attributes? Well, gosh, you know what? This person really is great at this. We're able to see that and measure that this way. So we know that they're the best for the job, absent a race. But knowing that that person has it and that we need to change a metric, you wouldn't know it unless you had somebody to look at it. So you're not really creating bureaucracy. You're only creating bureaucracy if you're lazy about your DEI and you think that DEI is just about like the color of someone's skin, which is actually like the opposite, the inverse of the spirit of it, right? That's not diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's just like saying, well, it's reverse racism in a way. So that being the case, let's keep on going.
Undercuts the meritocracy, that adds a lot of costs, and that slows you down. None of those.
What cost? Adds a lot of cost. What do you mean? It's just a focal point. And any person that's in HR can adopt this piece. It's interesting. They're going from like what a company would do at 5 employees on up to a company with 5,000 employees, and they keep flip-flopping what they're doing. Nobody has a large HR department with 20 or 30 people. They barely even have HR people sometimes, if that. And then as far as creating like a DEI or anything of that nature, it's basically like, yeah, again, it's more about, it doesn't cost you a bunch of money in bureaucracy. That's a leadership problem at the top. So who's making the decisions on who's sitting in those seats? The leader should be making that decision. HR, when is HR actually saying, no, you have to hire this person, right? It's more about that person in that leadership role doesn't know how to articulate, no, these are the metrics in the meritocracy in which we're like actually hiring for the role. We're not going to just put somebody in the role just because they are a certain race or color, right? We're putting them in the role because they're the right fit for the job. Here's everything that we've done in order to do that. They're not really like holding the leadership team accountable to what they need to do to articulate their problems. Or they maybe above them, the CEO or the investors of the board, they're not a great fit for this style of company, right? Meaning that their leadership style silos people from giving information on how to make things better because they stand to have some sort of negative impact for providing the truth about the situation. So again, like this stuff doesn't cost a bunch of money. It's just a state of mind. And really like an HR department, like could be one person that does a DEI and does all the other HR functions. It's no reason to abolish that part of the business.
Things that will help your company. What you need to have, I think Chamath laid out some really good best practices. You should have an outside law firm that I would say is, you could call it HR law, but I would just call it employment law. I would say like a non-ideological partner, an expert in employment law who sets up your company correctly and to whom you can take a complaint. If an HR complaint gets raised through the chain of your company, you do have to take it very seriously, and that's be.
If you have one complaint, it costs about $247,000 in litigation and fees to resolve if it goes through the full process. And that's before you even pay whatever fines are on. It costs a lot of money to do each one of these complaints. By the way, if you have an EPLI policy, right? An insurance broker, sometimes we have people who have that. That's why the deductibles are so high, because the insurance company is not willing to back this type of best practices. They're going to look at, well, what's your best practice? What's your handbook look like? If we're in court, it says, hey, well, we're going to subpoena your handbook if it gets there. Then the next piece is, okay, so what exactly did they do or not do? Did they report this? How did they report it? So if you do have PIPs and you have all that information about how you documented everything and all that, great. Who's coaching every single leader through that? As the organization gets to 100, 200, 300, do you really want every time there's an HR issue for it to cost you $200-something thousand just to go through the process, not even pay the claim or the fee or whatever it may be, right? Like, we're not even talking about that yet. We're just talking about just the legal fees alone. So then really, where's the cost center? Where's the cost center there? You have that happen one time. That's almost like the salary of 2 HR people in most organizations. Like a benefits special or an HR administrator and an HR business partner, you can probably get for around $300,000 or less with all the benefits and everything. That's about what it would cost. So one claim would pay for that. And if you're behaving and running your company in this way at large, 500,000 people, you're bound to have some claims happen, especially like in those types of organizations. I'm sorry, that just is absolutely ridiculous to say it's a cost center and then say that this is like how you would prefer it to be run.
A proper investigation, and that's probably best handled by an outside lawyer. So get that outside lawyer, and then
Sorry, by the way, always, there's
$100,000.
never a case where your coworker should know the intimate details of any of those. And that's what also creates this.
They're in a different department, your coworker, your HR person. So who knows the payroll? Finance, somebody has to know your payroll to be able to click approve for the company. So your coworker should never know the intimate details of your payroll and salary and all that. Who does? Who?
Horribly rotten culture in HR where these people act like gatekeepers of secret information, salary information, bonus information, and then.
What do you mean they are the gatekeepers of that information? Because they don't distribute it out to anybody. And if they are distributing it out to anybody, you should fire them. You should fire them immediately. What do you mean?
All of the other things. Oh, did you know this person did this with? It's terrible to have that inside of a company. It should go to a dispassionate third-party person whose job it is to maintain confidentiality and discretion.
That's what HR does. What do you mean? That's exactly what HR is supposed to do. If you have somebody in HR and they're not exercising any discretion or confidentiality, then you need to fire them immediately. This is just so terribly sad.
Yeah.
While investigating the truth.
Yeah. When HR is too powerful in a company, that's a red flag. At the end of the day, HR should be an administrative function. Their job should be to get people onboarded, sign their offer letter and their confidentiality and invention assignment agreement and set them up in payroll and get them benefits and that kind of stuff. It should fundamentally be an administrative function. And if it starts getting more powerful than that, it means there's been a usurpation.
You don't even need people for that. Like you have software that does that now and it's all automated. You send them a link, you go to your favorite, HR site and boom, it's done.
Yeah. I don't think you need a lot of people doing.
That guy must be investing in a lot of HR companies or, be drinking some of the sales Kool-Aid, because I can tell you myself, I work with all these companies, read the contract, read the service agreements. Read the service agreements and see how they take liability for mistakes that your company makes. The information that you report, that they submit, if there's any mistakes in that stuff, is really on you, because they're only going to report the information that you give them. It's your job as the employer to take on that liability. Now, look, if you're a law firm, I would say, hey, these guys are great clients. I would love to have these guys. Every single little HR issue or thing like that, you bring it to the lawyer. Fantastic. Like hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour. That's insane.
Anything you want to add to this discussion, Freeberg, as we move on to the next topic?
I think that unfortunately the term diversity, equity, inclusion has been captured along, as Chamath points out, a single vector, which is this immutable trait of your racial identity or gender. And I think the more important aspect for the success of a team, for the success of an organization, is to find diversity in the people that comes from different backgrounds, different experiences, different ways of thinking. And so I'm not a huge fan of race-based metrics or gender-based metrics driving. I'm generally more oriented around be blind to those variables and focus much more on the variables that can actually influence the outcome of the organization.
Yeah, one of the great paradoxes of this as well is we are moving to a much more multicultural, mixed race society anyway. People filling out forms, a lot of our kids, could pick 2 or 3 of the different boxes on a DEI form. It's not going to make much of a difference in the coming decades.
Yeah, he doesn't understand. So clearly he doesn't understand. So look, there's a way to make people happy with any budget as long as you know what you're doing. And in this video, what we've seen is that people at the end of the day, whether they know what HR does or not, they ultimately want performance. Investors want to see performance. CEOs are driven by that as well. And ultimately, people who work in organizations, they want to see their company perform for them as well. They want to know that if I give you my time and my contribution and my energy, I want to know that I'm going to get something back in return for that, right? Ultimately, it's about our time that we spend here on Earth. And having a professional inside the organization that can help you manage that is super important. A lot of what they said they want has nothing to do with whether or not HR is in or out of the organization. They could care less. However, I argue that in what they want, if they really want performance, and if you really want your organization to be a culture where people get everything that they want and they're happy and they're profitable and performing, then you need to create a meritocracy. I do agree with that. Facilitating that process means that you need to work with somebody who not only understands the company, the direction, and the P&L, how it works, and how to create a budget, but also understands the inner workings of how each person in those business units, those leaders, from the COO, CFO, the CEO and CMO, Chief Revenue Officer, everyone, how they're all moving together so that they can create a cohesive model where it unites the company in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you create these silos. So, if you do want to create a meritocracy, I do think that HR is a valuable asset for you. I wouldn't say you can abolish HR at all. They did talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and kind of, said that was a waste of money. I think, again, it goes back to if you want performance, then you get an HR department to facilitate that performance because somebody should specialize in the administration, the compliance, reporting, and all the things that happen around the people side of the business. You start to get a DEI program in place when you want to be an employer of choice and you want people to know that this truly is a meritocracy. And we have ways in which we can actually measure the success of what your inputs are and the outputs those relate to the company without having to look at things like your socioeconomic background, what college you went to. We have tangible things that you can do inside the company in order to express your value to us. Because just because somebody went to Harvard because of nepotism, let's say, versus somebody who's a great fit because they're an amazing software engineer and they put all the time and energy into becoming world class. That's the type of thing that that these people are trying to avoid and create a meritocracy around. HR has nothing to do with that. At least not a good HR person. So look, there's a way to make people happy with any budget if you know what you're doing. Schedule 30 minutes with us and let's have an honest conversation about what's possible for your team with your budget and how you can create a meritocracy in your organization through your benefits plan. All right, take care.